All right, ladies and gentlemen, so if you are watching this, it's probably because you just need some extra help or you just need some extra guidance in, applying the Pythagorean theorem. And for right now, that is perfectly fine. And what we are going to do is we're going to go over a couple questions on this worksheet. I'm going to go through some questions with you. I'm going to have you try some by yourself. Then I'll go over the answer, and we'll go over some of this stuff just so that you know what you are doing. If you feel, I've watched question number 1 or I've gone over this question, I feel confident in what I'm doing and I have a pretty good clue, then keep this video up, but you do it on your own and then just go through the answers if you feel like that's what you need. Other than that, this video is for your practice, for your benefit, so please use it wisely. Please follow along with me as I go over some of these questions. What I want to do here is I want to take a quick second just to review some of the things that we've already talked about, some of the things that we've gone over for the past couple days. So just real quick, once again, we know that when we are talking about the Pythagorean theorem, we are talking about a right triangle. And with that right triangle, we can label our sides A, B, and C. And once again, we know that this is a right triangle because it has that little square at the bottom symbolizing that that is a 90-degree angle. Once again, I want to highlight why we label A, B, and C. And it's always the shortest side I want you to label A. And we know that A and B connect together to form the legs. And finally, we have C, which is the hypotenuse, which once again is opposite of that right angle and also the longest side. And we know that, we've talked about that now as we go over some of these questions. Big thing to highlight here, once again, that the Pythagorean theorem, the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And what we're going to see here in this video and on this worksheet is you might not always have to find the hypotenuse. You might not always have to find side C. We might have, side A and C figured out and have to find B, or we might have B and C figured out and have to find A. And what we're going to do is, there's a little extra step that's involved with that, but we can still use what we already have known and what we've already learned to help us find that missing side length. So what I want to do, like I already said, is I want to walk through some of these questions with you and I want to talk about them. So for number 1, we have a right triangle, and I know that it's a right triangle because we have that little box in the corner. And the sides that we are given here is 12, which is on this side, 13, which is on this side, and x. And we don't know what x is, and that's the side that we need to figure out. The first thing that we need to do before we start writing down any work and start showing our steps and everything else is we need to figure out what are the sides that we have here on our right triangle. Well, once again, I know that this is side A, I know that this is side B, and I know that this is side C. The biggest thing here that you should be able to figure out is what is side C? Well, side C is opposite of the right angle, and it's also the longest side, so it's going to have the longest length. So we know that x, before we even get started, is not going to be longer than 13 inches. So please make sure you write this down. What we're going to do next here is now we're going to get started. And once again, we always write down the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? And once again, think about the sides that we labeled on our triangle. We know side A and side C, however, we do not know side B. So once again, we know side A is 12, so we just plug in 12 and we get 12 squared. We don't know side B, so we just keep it b squared. And finally, we know side C, and side C is 13, and we're going to have 13 squared. So using your calculator, you should be able to figure some of these things out, and you should be able to simplify them a little bit. So once again, we should know that 12 squared is 144. We don't know what b is, so we keep that b squared. And 13 squared is 169. So the big thing here that we need to understand is we now need to get b squared by itself. And if we remember how to do this from equation solving, we know that we can take the opposite and put it to each side. So once again, taking the opposite of 144, which is negative 144, and putting that on both sides of the equation. And what happens here is now these cancel out, and I'm left with 109 or 169 minus 144, which is 25. And I know that b squared now equals 25. Once again, just like we talked about yesterday, we don't want to find out what b squared is, we want to find out what b is. And our last step here is to take the square root of both sides to get b equals 5. And please circle your answer. As we look towards number 2, we see once again we have a right triangle and we have the 90-degree angle marked. And in this one, we are given that the side is 4 and 3. However, we do not now know this side, which is marked with X. And once again, we always identify our points. The two sides that come together, which are our legs that make that 90-degree angle, are going to be side A and B. And the side across or opposite of the right angle is always labeled C. So what we see in this question for number 2 is that we already know A and B, and we have to find C, which is our hypotenuse. And we should all know how to do this. So once again, we write down a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We know that a is 4, so 4 squared. We know that b, or side b, is 3, so 3 squared, and that gets us c squared. So, simplifying this, we know that 4 squared is 16, we know that 3 squared is 9, and we do not know what c is, so we just leave it c squared. Adding these two together, 16 plus 9, we get 25, gets us c squared. Finally, our last step here, since we have everything on the right side and c squared is by itself, we have to do the opposite, which is the square root, to get that c equals 5. So once again, please circle your answer and make sure that you have it down on your paper. As we move towards question 3, some of you look at this and you're like, I can't do this, Mr. Wanamaker. I have no clue. It doesn't even look like a right triangle. It's turned, it's flipped, it's changed. Whatever the excuse may be here, but let's keep in mind, right triangles are always marked with that little square in the corner to symbolize a 90-degree angle. So we know that this is a right triangle, and we are given a couple sides here. And yes, we are dealing with decimals, but that is okay. We have 11.9. We have 14.7, and we don't know what X is here. Now let's think to ourselves, we need to highlight and label each side. The easiest one to highlight and label should be the side opposite of the 90-degree angle, which we know is always side C. So the two sides that come together to make the 90-degree angle are once again our legs, and I'm going to label them A and B. So for this one, we do not know what side A is, but we know what side B and C are. So once again, we always start by writing down the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. We don't know what side A is, so we keep it a squared. But we know what side B is, and that's 11.9. So we plug that in, and we get 11.9 squared. And we know what side C is, and it's 14.7. And don't forget to square. So once again, you will need your calculator to do some of these things. We don't know what a squared is, so we leave it the same. We now simplify 11.9 squared, and you should get 141.61. And we do 14.7 squared, and you get 216.09. So, just like we did for number 1, we have to get a squared by itself. Well, how do I do that? Think to yourself, equation solving, opposite operation. You subtract 141.61 to both sides. These cancel out, and what you're left with is a squared equals whatever 216.09 minus 141.61 equals, and that is 74.48. We have one more step here, ladies and gentlemen, and that is to get a by itself, not a squared. So once again, we always do the opposite operation, which is the square root. And the square root of 74.48 is kind of a weird number, but we're going to round, and we're going to get a equals 8.63. So rounding to the hundredths place, we can see that we now have an answer. Circle it and make sure that you have it written down. The last question here that we're going to go over is number 4. And once again, you might be thinking, Mr. Wanamaker, this is a weird shape. It's flipped, it's turned, it's changed. It doesn't look like your typical right triangle. And once again, we know that right triangles have that little square in the corner that shows that 90-degree angle, and we know that all right triangles have one 90-degree angle. Okay, so once again, we're given a couple sides here, and in this case, we're given that this top side is 6.3. We're told, or we're given that this is 15.4, and we don't know side X. Like we've done in every single problem so far, and what we're going to continue to do is we need to label our sides. And once again, the easiest one to label is always going to be side C, because we know it's opposite of that right angle. So this is side C, and we can label then this side A and B, and I can tell once again that I now know each side, and I know what we're given and what we need to figure out. So once again, here we're given side A and C, and we need to figure out side B. So we always start, like we've done everything else, with the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and I plug in for what I know. I know that side A is 6.3, and I put that 6.3 squared. We don't know what B is here, and I know side C is 15.4, and I put 15.4 squared. We need to always simplify, so we need to figure out, well, what is 6.3 squared? And it is 39.69. We don't know what B is, so we keep B squared the same. And 15.4 squared equals 237.16. Like we've done with everything else, we always need to get our variable by itself here, and we need to get B squared by itself. Okay, so B squared by itself, which means that we need to take the opposite of 39.69 and subtract it to both sides. All right, we know that these cancel out, and if I use my calculator to just subtract both of these, I have 237.16 minus 39.69, and I get that B squared equals 197.47. Once again, our last step here is to take the square root, because that is the opposite operation of both sides, and we get B left over, and the square root of 197.47 is a funky number, and we're going to round it again to 14.05. 14.05 is your answer. Please circle it. Make sure that you have this written down. Thank you for following along. If you have any questions with these 4 problems, make sure that you see me and we can talk about them. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and let me know. Thank you.